Thank you very much. I appreciate your writing and I'm glad you're enjoying the record. I guess the guitar sounds on that record were primarily this guitar here. This is a custom shop Gibson CS336, kind of like a shrunken 335, but a slightly more high-end guitar. And it's one of my go-to guitars, especially with Steely Dan. Been using it for many years with them. It's a comfortable guitar to play. I like the sound basically, but it's in the Gibson ballpark and it's a nice one. I think most of the solo stuff on that record that I did was on this guitar. Perhaps there were some others I don't really remember. The amps we used were either my Guytron GT100 FV, but I know I didn't bring the speaker cabinet to that session because I was loading stuff into a cab, as we often do in New York City. So I didn't get to bring my whole rig. I did bring that head. I think we used a Marshall 4x12 that was in the studio for some of the stuff. But I do remember on one tune, which is Weather in My Head, the guys, Donald and Michael, had a very particular idea of the sound that they wanted to get. And they had rented some old Vibrolux reverb amp that was a vintage one. Not an amp I have. But they had a nice one, and it was all mic'd up in the studio when I got there, and they asked me to play through it, and I obliged. And I found it interesting because when I listened back to that track and then some others, you can tell there's a slightly different sound, but I guess what came through to me most of all was the fact that before I could even tell what amp it was, or before I could even tell what guitar it was, I could definitely tell it was me playing. And I think that probably means that more important than all those things are a player's hands, you know. It's and a player's head. I think those are the things that really have more power over what comes out eventually. Because I find no matter what amp I'm playing through, I'll adjust the tone control and the volume control and the controls on the amp until it pleases my ear. And so if an amp is a particularly bright one, I'll find myself turning the treble down and trying to get a fatter sound out of it. If it's a dark one, I might turn the tone up all the way or something. You know, I'm going for a certain thing that I imagine in my head, and if it doesn't feel right, I try to change it so that it does. So it's funny in a way, because I'm letting my taste lead, and the sound of my hands is just going to be the same no matter what, because you can't really do much about that. That's just a natural thing, and so because I'm leading with my head and my taste that way, I think a lot of times it comes out sounding more similar than you would expect, even though I'm using a different amp or a different guitar, because I think that's just sort of the way this stuff works. I hope that answers your question, and thanks for writing.